Trafficking, pornography, political circles, concepts that honestly the community will have a hard time comprehending or
Because that's what I want
receiving
people
with it.
that have listened to this podcast so far to understand, that we're not talking about someone yelled at you one time as a kid and told you no. We're
Yes.
talking about very deep subjects that have been circulating in the
Yes.
media, islands and this and that.
That's right
But
along the lines. That's right.
just like you're saying, those aren't fake.
Mm-hmm.
Those are real, and you guys have dealt with situations very similar. Amy, how are you?
Hey, Philip.
It's been, what, a year? Probably
Yeah.
a little over a year since the last time we saw each other.
I think a little over a year.
Awesome. You had to drive all the way out here to the sticks from New Bern. You found out that we live right in the country, so awesome.
Country.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Good drive.
But it's worth it because look at this setup. This is amazing.
Yeah, and the thing is,
In your
like,
your former dining room.
yeah, former dining room
Yeah.
now turned into the bourbon room. So yeah, it's always
Also nice.
Always a fun little conversion right there. Now, obviously, we're here today to do the podcast, all that stuff. Me and you have interviewed in the past for Hesed Place, your organization, and we're going to talk a little bit about that too. But first things first, Amy, for those that are watching that don't know who you are, what's your name, where are you located, and what do you do for a living?
My name's Amy Connor. I'm from New Bern, North Carolina, and I'm a trauma trained occupational therapist.
Beautiful, beautiful. Now, I've heard of occupational therapy before, but it's like those acronyms. You got PT, you got OT, you got this and that. What exactly is occupational therapy, and who is it for?
Occupational therapy is going to center around what's meaningful in a person's life. And so it spans the lifespan. So anywhere from NICU on up through hospice, newborns, up through seniors, every stage of life, depending on what you're trying to do in that portion of the field, really. It's like 50 different professions inside one profession. It's really fascinating. But it's going to encompass whatever is needed for that person to be able to function to his or her maximal capacity for that developmental place, or for that rehabilitative place if it's after an accident, or in my case as a trauma trained OT, after trauma, and how is that affecting a person's function, and what do they need in order for us to be able to help that person reach their maximum capacity and their maximum quality of life as well. Because occupation and what is meaningful to us allows us to serve out of our gifts, allows us to know who we are, allows us to make a difference on this planet and have relationships and maintain our relationships and glean from them and give back as well.
From the uneducated standpoint, when I heard occupational therapy, I immediately think something dealing with someone's job, like
It can be.
you're rehabilitating them to get back to their job or something like that. And then you say trauma trained occupational therapy. I'm thinking you're in the ER and stuff like that. Dive a little bit deeper into that. So pick apart these words: occupational, trauma. What exactly are we talking about?
First of all, occupational therapists can work in the workplace, because then you're going to also look at ergonomics. How do you maximize their setting? Maybe somebody's been through an accident or had a stroke or had a brain injury and needs help rehabbing, but
Is that more of like an HR type of department, like you would be within their department?
no, you would be the therapist to help rehabilitate the
Gotcha.
person and heal, but you would be applying what is that person going to need to be able to go back to work. So then you work on those skill sets in order for that person to be able to reach the maximum capacity. Now, if they might not heal to where they were before, then you might be going into the workplace and saying, how can I adapt the setting? How can I educate the workplace? How can I make this work where this person can go back to work, but there are going to be some modifications, things like that. Also, maybe set up the workspace where they can physically do the job that they need to do, or protect carpal tunnel's a big thing. How do you help them set up the workspace where you're going to protect the joints and be able to get the job done, things like that as well.
So it's not like physical therapy, like where you're actually manipulating things for them to work again. You're really just trying to help them adapt to this new change in their life or this new trauma in their life.
No, we do that as well.
Really? Okay.
Yes. So
this is exactly why we were sitting down.
I know,
this
which
right
is
now.
amazing, because this is the thing, and this is what I love about occupational therapy. You take the whole person like the whole being. The way I define the whole being is body, heart, mind, soul, and spirit. And when you have that person and they're living life and something happens, they may be, if you're working in peds, that individual may be born with cerebral palsy, but they're going to be living life in this world. So how can an occupational therapist help that child through the development, maximize the development, educate the family can carry over as well, but get that child's brain healing as much as possible along with everything that's included in the whole person in order to reach maximum capacity. It's the same thing with something like trauma. For someone who has been through trauma, that's going to affect the brain, that's going to affect the mindset, it's going to affect relationships, it's going to affect function, the central nervous system, all of that. So the OT has a fantastic capacity to basically do what we call activity analysis. What is that person going to need to be able to do in life to function maximally, and then to help break that down and address all of those components to help that person succeed.
I have a really interesting question for you. Is it easier or more difficult for you to perform your occupational therapy duties to someone who was born with an ailment or someone who has lived life normally and then, boom, had an ailment? Because I feel like if you're born, for example, with one leg or one arm, from the time you were born, you've learned how to adapt to it. And even without an OT, you've somehow figured out a way to be normal in your own life. But then let's say that, God forbid, if you lose a limb or something traumatic happens to you mentally and all that, when you were normal and now you're transitioning here, you have a lot of things that you have to take into account.
That's a pretty loaded question because you can look at that from the perspective of the person and from the perspective of the therapist. So when you have a person who something's happened to the person, whether that's at birth or later in life, there's going to be a significance of degree, right? You might have a mild impairment, moderate impairment, severe impairment. So that's going to affect how much help can we offer that person functionally. You help get them to the maximum function, but then it's going to look more like adaptation and modification. And then you kind of blend in, and then that might add some more function to what they're able to do. If you're looking at it from a perspective too of someone who has lived some life and they have former experience, well, they also may have learned skill sets that then help them adapt and modify later.
That makes sense.
So they can kind of, it's kind of like, okay, in rehab, if you're talking about knee replacements, you might have somebody who has a double knee replacement at the same time. Well, they're going to be able to use their upper body strength even more so than somebody that has one knee replacement. And they're going to be able to glean from their former experience to be able to do that. If they don't have that, they can't use it.
They're also going to realize how much they use their legs before they couldn't use them anymore.
Right, because a lot of times we don't realize the capacity that we have until we lose something.
Yeah, I have a perfect
that's
example,
common
and
too.
this is definitely not along the lines of cerebral palsy or a double knee replacement. But I'm getting older now. I'm 32.
Come on.
And I woke, so I grew up skateboarding. Me and you have talked about this before. And obviously ankles, knees, wrists, elbows, they've all been banged up and everything. I woke up the other day and I stepped off my bed and my ankle did not work anymore. I think I have like an impinged ankle, and I have literally been like trying to work it back into where it needs to go. But you realize like really quickly once you lose something that you're so normally able to have, it's a detriment.
That's right.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you this. So, we've talked about, kind of what you do and the definitions of it and all that, and there's so many different things that you do. But how did you actually get into occupational therapy? And is this something that you wanted to be for Halloween, like as you were a little kid? Did you always want to be the occupational therapist?
So I'll tell you that story. I always wanted to be a veterinarian. I love, love, love animals. I also love people, but I knew that I loved animals before I knew I loved people. And I had two parents who were very involved and loving in my life, and decided, I guess, to brave a conversation with me in high school. and sat me down and actually said, Amy, listen, I know you love animals, but this is what we see as far as your gifts and what happens when you're with people, and how you relate with them and kind of how you see them, and how you address things. And ever since I was very, very little, they would say, even I would walk by some random man and like, that man's not very happy. I would say these little things and they picked up on that. And then as I grew, there just was a lot of relational capacity there.
And this is far before you were an OT.
High school. And so they sat me down, and I had a good enough relationship with my parents to respect really what they said. And I thought about that. Now, what happened was, though, that I also, my mom is a nurse, but she had worked with adults with special needs. And as a child, I would go with her to work and had these relationships with these, adults, and appreciated what they went through. I went to college as a special ed major. I did 2 years of my prerequisites and did my first observations, and it just wasn't for me. Came out of there kind of in a panic. Before I left high school, and this is a clue to younger people who, when adults see something in your life and they kind of think, you might want to look into this, don't disregard it completely, because there was actually a lady in our circle who was telling my parents I would be a really good occupational therapist. And I had found out that I needed to take physics in order to do OT.
Do you like math?
I had math anxiety.
Yep.
So I have this, real strong right side brain that, and I struggled with math all my life, and it struck the terror in me. And I didn't even look into OT, just knowing I would have to take physics. And so I spent 2 years doing all of my prerequisites for special ed, panicked, just because it wasn't for me. It's a wonderful field. And changed my major to pre-OT in 4 days, after 4 days of tears with my parents on the phone, and then did what I should have done very early.
This was 2 years in.
This was 2 years into college, into my undergraduate. Then I did exactly what I should have done early on. And I got right into the OT department down the street at the Medical University of South Carolina and did observations, did some volunteering to make sure this time I was on the right path.
Kind of like what we were talking about earlier with an apprenticeship type of
Yes,
deal.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like, get in the setting. That's what I would recommend. If you are a parent or a young person listening to this, like, tell your kids, go do the volunteering, because you're going to know, like, is this for me? Does it resonate with me? Does this light me on fire in a way that, like, this is hard, but I can't not do it?
See, I don't want to cut you off, but like, even with my intern right now, their whole class, they're in their senior year, second semester senior year, and they are just now provided with the project of, you need to find a mentor and shadow them for a project and report back. This needs to be done, right? Like sophomore year, not freshman year when you're trying to figure stuff out, but sophomore year, if you're going to college, that should be the year that the project happens, where you get to shadow someone, because you may hate this job.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And so I went ahead and started. I ended up with a BS in psychology. I went to College of Charleston in South Carolina, graduated with a BS in psychology, because as I started to apply for the occupational therapy program, it was very, very competitive. And it took me 3 years just to get into the program. And at that point, I was so determined. And every year I would reapply. And by the 3rd year, they came to me and they said, at this point, they knew me well. And they said, Amy, what are you going to do next year if you don't get in? I said, I'm going to reapply. So they'll let me in. So, I finally got in and finished my OT degree. So it ended up being 2 bachelors. It's a bachelor in psychology and a bachelor in occupational therapy. I grandfathered in. Well, I didn't. It was the last year before they required a master's.
Gotcha. Yes, you're a grandfather into that whole system. Because I was going to ask you too. So, is this something that you can do with just a bachelor's degree? But now I guess you said that you have to go on
Yeah,
and get your
it's
master's.
mandatory masters, and now their OTs getting their doctorates as well.
Really, really. So I mean, schooling wise, I mean, so bachelor's that was 4 years, depending on if you get accepted to the program when you
Yep.
first apply. But now masters, what are we looking at? What 6 years?
Well, with it was a 2-year program, 2-year OT program. So for me, I went 6.
Okay,
But with the masters, I don't know if they're requiring when they had just changed it, I think it was an extra year, but
gotcha,
it might be more than that. I'm not sure. It's
gotcha.
changed since then. So,
Gotcha. Well, Amy, you work with trauma patients specifically. We talked about this with Hesed Place in the past before, complex trauma patients. I want to know what is the difference for patients with complex trauma versus just your run-of-the-mill everyday trauma, which I know is a very blanket statement,
yeah.
but what's the difference?
Complex trauma is really more of a sustained interpersonal trauma, often starts in childhood. You're going to have a significant effect from repeated traumas. A lot of times it includes developmental trauma, attachment trauma. So the brain is developing around a constant exposure to trauma or seasons of trauma. So children, the short way I explain that a lot of times is, I work with the adults who were missed as children. They didn't get the help when they were in these sustained abusive situations. Something like PTSD or post-traumatic syndrome is going to be more of like a singular event, maybe an earthquake, a sexual assault, something like that. Nothing is a just anything. We get affected by the things that happen in our life. And even you and I have sustained trauma because every human has. So we go through things that affect us because we're up against the world. So when we define the root of trauma really is immobility. So when we come up against something hard, and if we feel like we're immobilized either internally or externally and we can't move through it, we respond and we react to that. So then there are the effects of it. But when you're dealing with complex trauma, you're looking at sustained and often developmental trauma, and where the brain has really had to acclimate and adjust around abnormal circumstances, because trauma responses are normal responses to abnormal circumstances. So the reason that we end up having functional issues, which is what we're addressing in occupational therapy, is because we are responding the best we know how to the circumstances that we've been through until we have the resources and the help that we need so that we can heal through and really have a chance to, in a way, redevelop. And the amazing piece of that is, first of all, that our brain adapts to survive when we're little, however we need to. And that looks a lot of different ways. But the other amazing piece is that it has the capacity to heal throughout the life. So all of our lifetime, we have the capacity to heal.
You've told me before that the healing is never done. It's just
Never
a
done.
process.
It's a lifestyle. I like to call it a lifestyle. I have that lifestyle. I would want that for you. I would want that for everybody. And the more we can destigmatize trauma, realize that it's normative. Like trauma in life is normative. It's just a scale.
The problem that we have now, though, and I'm sure you see it all the time, is just like if you take away a kid's video game, it's labeled as your trauma, you're being a horrible parent, and stuff like that. Which you speak on that a little bit too. There may be, I guess, symptoms and types to that. Degrees, but it's just like I feel like now, back when, and I know we're two different ages, but when I was a kid, like, you know, you would have to go through something in order to go through something. But nowadays, I just feel like, and maybe it's just because I'm older now and I have my own kids, but it's just people stigmatize just the littlest, tiniest thing that maybe when we were kids wasn't even a big deal.
Well, perspective is everything, right?
Perspective, yeah, that's a really good way.
And
Yeah.
what are we believing? And do we understand behavior and development? Like, I hope that as parents, we have some understanding about that. And then what are we going along with culture that needs to be counterculture at this point? I think we need to be asking that question. And then how do we feel And how do we respond to something when we get pushback? We need to ask ourselves that question as well. So sometimes we need to be going counterculture as parents. Sometimes we need to be going counterculture as individuals, but how do we educate ourselves, reach out for resources, understanding what's true, asking ourselves the question, well, is what I believe about that true? Even when you're talking about something like that, is what I'm believing that is being impressed upon me by these other perspectives truth-based? Or is
Right.
it lie-based thinking? Because really this is my kid that's
Yeah.
getting involved. So how can I help my kid's brain develop as functional as possible so we can help him or her grow into and develop into the most, well-thinking person in the
Yeah.
world that he or she is living in, because the world is constantly changing.
Well, even when you get into the college age kids now, because we see it all across campuses now all the time, where a professor said something that maybe crossed the line a little bit, and then the whole campus revolts and all that. I mean, would you classify that as trauma, or is that just like people just going way over the top? And
Mass resistance and digital influence.
yeah,
Like, I mean, that's not my field, but I think that brains are being affected
yeah.
every day by the world that we live in.
Because like you're a professional in the field of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Like you know the definition, but then some people can see the word trauma as subjective. Well, you don't know my trauma because, it's a
Well,
different type of
trauma
thing.
is relative.
Right.
Trauma is relative to self. So that's why you can't compare somebody's trauma based on function, because we perceive what's happening in the presence of a traumatic situation based on ourselves only and that interaction. And so you can't compare. Like, human beings tend to have this coping strategy that sounds like, well, so many are worse off, right? But see, the thing is that doesn't negate ever what a human being is going through, because our own experiences are relative to self. And that doesn't make us selfish. It means that if we can understand ourselves more, which is one thing we spend a lot of time doing at Hesed Place, is helping people understand themselves more so that we can be more realistic and truth-based in what our approach is. I don't think any of us wants to knowingly be, you think about the bull with the ring in his nose and how that big old animal can just be like taken right over here with the ring in his nose.
Right.
I don't think any of us wants to be that willingly subjected to that. And yet, if we aren't thinking, healing, growing, understanding the reality of how life affects us and who we are as an individual, then that kind of happens in life in ways. And so the example that you gave, like on the college campus, that's kind of what I think. I was like, well, that was, if we want to use the word triggered, or if we want to use, the concept of sociology and group psychology, what happened there? Something happened. They reacted sociologically out of their psychology, and there's this whole big massive mess.
Yeah.
But if we each understand ourselves more and more, then we're contributing not only to our own selves, but personal relationships, and then to our family units, and then to society. And that's one way that we can help be a proactive part of the world.
Gotcha. Well, and it's I listen to Joe Rogan podcast a lot too, and one of the things he says that kind of relates back to what you said is the worst thing that's happened to you is the worst thing that's ever happened to you. So
Mm-hmm.
just like you said,
Mm-hmm.
you can't compare your trauma to someone else's
That's right.
because it could literally be the worst thing that's ever happened to you, even if it may seem insignificant to someone that's experienced more trauma,
That's
stuff like
right.
that.
That's interesting that you brought that up, because in fact I put it aside because I was like, oh, I'm going to put that into a training. I'm actually going to use that. But I came across my childhood journal, and I, of course, whenever I find it, I'm like, I get sucked in. But there was that simple little writing that, and the words were, "This is the worst day of my life."
Yeah.
And then to hear what I said, I just chuckled and I was like, that's the perspective example.
Yeah.
It's exactly where I was on that day in that developmental place.
Did you have a boyfriend break up with you?
No, no, I don't think it was even. It literally was so silly that I'm like, clearly, I think I got fussed at or something,
Yeah, yeah.
But it was true to me in that moment. It was true to me,
Right.
and it's also a good
Because
example.
it was probably the worst thing you ever went through in that moment.
And exactly,
Yeah.
and if as parents and as caring individuals with others in life, if we could realize that through developmental stages or through somebody's individual day, even if they're adults, but we can kind of, the best we can, understand developmentally where they're at, understand some basics about how life affects us,
Yeah.
and then remember that this is the key question to trauma-informed care, is instead of what's wrong with you, what happened to you? That's always the question to be asking. If you understand developmentally, when a toddler is just flipping the heck out and has no reasoning happening whatsoever in their prefrontal cortex, because their emotions have gone exactly where they need to go for that toddler, and that toddler needs help regulating. The toddler does not have the capacity to do that on his or her own yet. And so if we ask that question, well, instead of what's wrong with you, what happened to you? Well, something happened and that child responded as he or she should at that age, but we need to help meet them where they're at that age, at that developmental place. We can also kind of ask ourselves that question for any other person who has lived their individual life. So we might not know the whole picture. There's a big movement, be kind. You never know what people have been through. That's exactly right. Like, don't be a doormat, but understand that people do things for a reason. They're doing something for a reason. And when do we ever know the full picture?
Right.
I mean, you can know your own partner or spouse and never know the full picture because that person is who he or she is inside. We have to remember that for every person. So understanding behavior and how life affects us, and also how to help people regulate, how to help de-escalate, how to help ourselves regulate so that when we are up against things, we feel a calm that can kind of help bring a calm into the room. All of that's helpful.
Gotcha. And I want to ask you about this because, I mean, as an OT, the difference between an occupational therapist and just a therapist you talk to,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've talked a little bit about it before. Is there a big difference? I mean, people still have to sit down and talk with you and work through their problems and all that.
I love that question because while we're developing
I mean, we
the
did a scene for your video where that's exactly what we did.
Yep. And
Yeah.
while we are launching the Trauma Trained OT at Hesed Place, one of my priorities is to partner with licensed clinical counselors because OT can have such a profound role in helping people who want to do their deeper therapeutic work with a therapist be prepared for that, be able to do it better, more functionally, deal with some of the aspects of life that will help them get to the place where they can do that in more of an in-touch way, and also to understand themselves better, especially if they're looking at the kind of trauma that has affected them and they live life dissociatively or with dissociative identity disorder. I have a real heart to work with folks who struggle with that degree of trauma, and it's affected them in ways that it's just really hard to function throughout the settings in life. And the bottom line, I believe, for those of us who are in helping professions, when we are here for that population of people, not only is it an honor to be a problem solver in order to really try and help them get to where they want to go and have that chance to redevelop or touch base in life in ways that they've always hoped for, or they've fought and fought and fought to find the right resources. And I've seen that so many times. But it's important that we are thinking in ways from the place of understanding that we have and how best to help each individual person get there. And I think that's one of the most profound roles that occupational therapy can play when it comes to trauma, and helping that person be best prepared and best capable too of coping through that difficult process of therapy. And so I think that there is a really beautiful companionship that can happen between those two fields, and it's something that I'm actively embracing.
Well, the reason why I ask is because there's a big new emerging market of the virtual therapy, online therapy, on the phone
Mm-hmm.
therapy. Uh, from someone who is in that field, is that a good route to go if someone is needing to talk to someone, or is person to person more effective?
Isn't it interesting how the state of the planet has affected trends right now, right?
Right.
So, I'm referencing the pandemic, and that was something that blew up. Remote everything
Because you
blew
weren't
up.
allowed to do anything. Yeah.
Okay, so what an amazing resource to have, to be able to go to people in that way when we've desperately needed that. That is going to be a very person specific and situationally specific factor when it comes to remote therapy, because it can be wonderful. It can be a wonderful adjunct. It can definitely be therapist dependent. Like, it doesn't matter what professional you're dealing with, okay? It doesn't, same thing. You could go to a good car mechanic or a bad car mechanic.
Right.
What are your specific needs? And I would hope for each person watching this to value yourself enough to be proactive in your own care, to ask questions that are important to you in choosing a therapist and a mode of therapy. There are some people who have gone through such volatile situations that remote therapy really would not be the safest route for them. Not only that, but asking ourselves the question, where is personal interaction and contact going in this day and
Right.
age?
Right.
And yet there are some who don't have that kind of availability.
Because we could have done this interview via Zoom,
Yep.
but I personally just don't, there's no connection, I don't
Nope.
think. Yeah.
And I drove an hour to get here because
Right.
it's worth it.
Thank you.
I mean, it's worth it. And I think that's very important as well. But at the same time, especially for some of the clientele that I work with, and they have been through some of the most severe trauma, and it's affected them in ways where they have a really hard time finding local resources. And so that's wonderful to have that available if it is done within the parameters that it is safe and it meets the needs of that person. And hopefully each professional will know with individual situations if that's the case or not.
Well, that segues me perfectly into the next question. We haven't talked about it yet, but I want to talk a little bit about your organization, Hesed Place.
Mm-hmm.
I did a video for you guys, a donor video,
Mm-hmm.
and I learned a lot during that process and how heavy of a topic and heavy of a subject it is. A couple of questions first.
Mm-hmm.
What made you get into it? What is Hesed Place? Why do you keep on doing it? We're going to cover all these, but go for it.
Okay. All right, Hesed Place is a nonprofit organization. Hesed is Hebrew for the words loving kindness. Actually, in English, it would take paragraphs to even try and describe the word. I, probably for the last 13 years, have been immersing myself in as much education, networking, certification work by way of occupational therapy, that kind of thing, in trauma studies and dissociation. That's because in our local community, there were other local professionals that were sending some folks my way. When I was raising my kids, I was doing other things in life. I was founding Hesed Place, but I also was running an equestrian center and things like that. Raising my kids, but building my own knowledge and understanding in order to help this group of folks. And in the meantime, local professionals also knew that I was doing some of that. So we would tag team really to help people best. And many of those people live life with dissociative identity disorder. And that is the kind of trauma that these folks have been through is
And to
so
clarify, isn't
severe.
that the old or isn't that the new version of multiple personality disorder?
It
Because
is.
we talked about that before.
Yep,
Yeah.
it is. And so that's going to be a direct result of complex trauma in childhood. So for these adults who are living life, sometimes don't even realize that that's the scope of what they've been through at that point. But yet functionally, it is so hard to maintain relationships or keep friends, hold a job, raise a family, and find the right help. And so, as
Because you have to have someone that is trained in that specific field, which is a very narrow
trauma and
subject.
dissociation,
Right.
and we can be very helpful with these folks from different angles within different professions. And one of those ways is trauma informed care and training the community. So in these years of raising my own kids while I was expanding my own education and networking and learning, as I also helped with some other professionals in the population, um, my heart just really cried out for these survivors that kept coming through my door who, I guess the best way I could say it was just they felt ping-ponged. Like their strength and tenacity is amazing. I mean, they have made it through the worst of the worst. And yet they're trying so hard to find the right place to get the right help. And so I asked myself this question, and it was, what would a community need to be able to do in order to help this person well? It was that question. And I, scribbled it out on a piece of paper. You saw that. And it became a vision. And after talking to some people in the community and just very naturally people who have a heart to serve people who are hurting, we would have these conversations. We formed a visionary committee. We met for about a year and a half just as a visionary committee, as we then decided nonprofit is the way to go. Got our 501c3 in 2018, and then of course had to survive a global pandemic as a young nonprofit. And now we are just now really actively now launching our first programs, which is very exciting.
Beautiful.
um, and our scope is tremendous. So I hope and I think that this scope will surpass my lifetime. We are focusing first on our local community in New Bern, North Carolina, which is an honor and a privilege to do. And as we pull together our local folks who also care about serving in this way, and as we fund our programs, and we can only do as much as we can fund what we have to work with. And we also have the capacity to take what we're calling our trauma-informed town within a town model, which involves very specified trauma-informed care training for 6 community groups. Those community groups are medical and therapeutic, law enforcement, educators, service providers, and other professionals, civic organizations, including churches, and also what we call life groups, which are survivor support groups. So we're developing trauma-informed care training for those specific community groups that we can first put out into New Bern and build our own community and offer that to our community, where those types of providers can open their doors and treat each person in a trauma-informed care way. And then we can take that model to other communities around the world, really. And we've had a lot of interest. We just can't work fast enough. It's like, it's so much to do. We would love to open a trauma center. We would love to have a transitional living community where we can have a place to help, especially, the survivors that are least understood and have a hard time escaping what their networks have been for all of their life. To be able to have a very structured and well-trained environment to help them begin those first steps. So there's a lot to do. We're also launching what we're calling our Engage Community Program, and that's involving our local organizations. Immediately, we're working with our Justice Involved group, and also with those who are, to understand the complex trauma behind addiction, doing that. And we would like to probably sooner than later also tap into maybe helping our local refugees and then maybe even our folks that are living life with DID.
There's a big
So
plan.
it'll go forever. If there's a need, we want to be able to develop it. And so we are really looking at what does it take for a community to pull together and to offer the training, but also bring together the expertise, bring together the conversation, support one another. What's your expertise so that we can work together? What's missing? What's missing in your organization? Because instead of there being competition, we can open up the conversation and say, Hesed Place can be this collaborative hub. And you take this training, and whether it's level 1, level 2, or the intro to trauma-informed care course, and you're now part of our network. And then we also would like to develop an app. And we develop the app, and then we can resource all of those community resources under the app. There's a lot to do, and I'll be doing it for the rest of my life. But it's just going to be unfolding and happening as we can do it.
Beautiful. We've talked a lot about different forms of trauma and I guess different tiers and stuff like that. And we've talked about yours, which is the severe childhood trauma. Do you, you can go into as much detail as you want to, but are there any success stories? I know that you guys have some people on your board, don't want to name their names or anything like that. They've told me their story. But is there anyone that you have just seen from where they were to where they are now? And can you talk about it a little bit?
Well, so what I'll say, and this is really important, I carry many stories with me every day. And I treasure and honor other stories as their stories to tell. I'll say this too, as an organization, Hesed Place refuses to sensationalize, which I know is not what you're asking me to do.
Right.
However, I will say that many I've seen have come out of organized and extreme abuse. Their bravery begins with trust, and the trust takes years to develop.
And that's a really good way to actually put this story. So rather than focusing on a specific individual, what about, you're talking about organized. What are we talking about with that? Are we talking about trafficking? What are we talking about?
Trafficking, pornography rings, political circles, concepts that honestly the community will have a hard time comprehending or
Because that's what I want
receiving with
people
it.
that have listened to this podcast so far to understand, that we're not talking about someone yelled at you one time as a kid and told you no. We're
Yes.
talking about very deep subjects that have been circulating in the media.
Yes.
I mean, islands and this and that.
That's right along
But
the lines. That's right.
just like you're saying, those aren't fake. Those are real, and you guys have dealt with situations very similar.
That's exactly right. And the thing is that one thing that Hesed Place doesn't want to negate is also the day-to-day trauma. And we've actually created our mission statement around that so that we can also provide a path to healing for all adults who are interested. So we don't want to be able to say, okay, we can just help those who have that degree of trauma. We want to invite every adult who wants to heal to tap into our online resources, to our, we've got an entire global community.
Various degrees. It's not a one size fits all.
Exactly. So we want to have something for everybody to engage in, while we're also focusing on, what are the most intense direct services that we need to provide for those who have been through some of the deeper, more significant abuses. And I say that because too, there are a lot of wonderful providers and services that can help with the more traditional trauma. And we want to be able to do that as well. But we, as an organization, began because the folks that were so severely traumatized were having a hard time finding what they needed.
Right now, your focus is still them.
That's like our heart and our drive for getting where we need to go. And in the meantime, we're finding ways to help the general population as well. But in answer to your question, success stories in general look like building trust, establishing safety, understanding that even really what a meaning of safety means, that's often even not understood, making choices in changes of life. And I will tell you that survivors that I've walked with have made such extreme choices to choose a new way, and the risk that they take is so admirable. It's nothing that most of us will live. And so to be able to ask the question, that same question, what do we need to do as a community to help people who need that kind of help, is an honor in itself. But that looks like longitudinal assistance. Like, this is not this isn't 1 year. This is, what does it look like to have the stages of life be readdressed? And in working with the other professionals over the last decade and hearing some of the discussions, some of the hardest aspects of that journey for that survivor is the interrelational, the connection, because they come out of such severe attachment trauma, but also just having people walk with them through life who are going to stay. And so for us, that's going to be, it's really, really important. And at the same time, like, we're asking ourselves the question, how can we best set that person up for success in a way that they have what they need to kind of learn how to live life out here? And that's a question, they should be afforded that chance. Should not be expected to know how to do that. And so when they are fighting so hard to do everything they can to just maybe have a chance, maybe this person can help me, maybe I'll take a risk over here. And they're responding inside in significant ways because that's not what the trauma has designed them to do. Talk about counterculture.
Right.
They knew a culture of abuse. So their entire whole person has adjusted to the culture of abuse so that they could live. And then they try something different, and then that looks like total chaos. That's what you should expect. That would be the response. So how do we act in a way as helpers and as a community, as an organization, with grace and understanding and knowledge to afford that human being the next decade or so to have a new chance?
Right.
And we can do that. And that is what that looks like. That looks like walking with them through life in a way that's consistent and caring. And they are the best pickers in the world. They have made it through, so they will know if you're real or if you're full of it.
Right. Right.
And so I do see success stories. And I also see that journey and that process is very difficult and yet worth it. But at the same time, for those who have not been through it, and I do not identify as a trauma survivor, for those of you who might be wondering, yet I have been told, and I only say this because I've been told it a lot, they don't understand how I understand.
Right.
And I think that's one way that when we are kind of like when you asked me the question, how did I get into OT? Did I always know? No, but somehow I got there, didn't I?
Right.
And it's like the perfect place for me personally. You and photography and all that you do, it's the perfect place for you because you are built with the gifts that you have to do what you're doing as a human being. We are walking along survivors, hoping and helping them get to where they get to reclaim their giftedness. Under the guise of abuse, that gets garnished off of them, but we want to help them get to the place where they can know themselves, where they can know healing, they can know joy, they can know relationship, they can know, who am I? Who am I and what am I good at? because I promise them, if you're a survivor and you're watching this, I promise you that's in there. And, we know that. And so we want to say there is hope for healing. And just because what's happened has happened and then a survivor has adjusted around what has happened doesn't mean that there is no broken. There's no, you hear that terrible term, damaged goods. Not true. Ask yourself, we got to ask ourselves that question. Is what I believing true? Is what I was just told true? Is that truth-based? That's not truth-based. It's just that we are neurologically, biologically set up to survive. And so we've done the surviving, and that we show up with behaviors that are no longer helping us the way they used to. And now when we find safety and we find hope and we find the potential to move forward, we're allowed to reconsider and ask ourselves, well, what else is there for me? Can I begin to reclaim what really should have been mine from day one? And that's what we want to do for survivors.
Well, I think you answered that question perfectly without even giving details, specifics, and all that. So I think it was perfect. We're starting to wrap this thing up a little bit now, but I want to know, you deal with a heavy subject matter pretty much on a daily basis. How do you deal with that on your own? I guess, is it something that you can just turn on, turn off? Like, how do you deal with that?
Well, I'm a firm believer that we each are unique to having the capacity to do what we're supposed to be doing on this planet. I will tell you, and I'll tell you from a very vulnerable place, like I am on my own constant healing journey every day. That will look like every day to me. So if I am going to walk with survivors in this way, and I'm going to say, this is at least what I understand. I'm not always going to get it right, but I'm going to help the best I can, and we're going to pool together resources, and then we're going to say, these are some important steps for you to take if you want this to change. That takes courage like no person has ever considered.
Right.
So I look at my own life in a way that I have to ask those same questions. And if I'm not going to ask of myself the same types of things to not just, when we walk with survivors, we're maybe for the first time talking about self-worth, maybe considering self and not having to betray self, because when abuse is portrayed over a person, there's no option but to betray self.
Right.
So for me, to do what I do means that I also take care of myself. I also consider what I'm needing. And I will tell you, most of my life does not consist of me just doing what I need, because it's very busy doing this work.
Right.
But while I do that, it might be 10 minutes outside, and people who know me say sunshine on my head. So, that's where I'll start.
Get some vitamin D.
Yes, that's right. Or I go, and spend a little time with my animals. Or
we talked about that 2 podcasts ago, where people are just locked up and angry on the internet now because they're not getting any sunlight. So.
Exactly. Connection, for me, being with a close friend, or, so I ask myself that, but then I also have worked on my own belief sets. And if there aren't some of us who can live this life knowing that the fact is, okay, this stuff happens all around us. Mm-hmm. And we can't be afraid to recognize that as a reality. So when people need help, they need good help, they need resources, they need consistency, they need time, they need funding. When people need help, if I don't look at it kind of for what it is, and then say, well, now what is my role in that? And take care of myself as I do it, then nobody's going to get helped. Same with the other people who will join that cause,
right.
But we are huge believers. Our board, our Hesed Place team, we support one another. We know all about self-care and recognizing our limits and doing the best we can, and when to ask for help. And our own self-awareness, and if we need our own therapy sessions, we should normalize all of this. This is modeling. There's a lot of modeling happening when we do what we do and we walk this with the people we serve.
Well, that puts me right into the next thing. This is kind of a two-parter just to kind of wrap this thing up. But, first of all, how can listeners actually support Hesed Place? Is there a place to make donations? Is it money? Is it supplies? Tell me all about that part.
Please do support Hesed Place. Two things that we need the most right now is funding. You can find that option on hesedplace.com. It's our main website, and there are options for giving there. And the other is volunteers. We need volunteers. We're doing a lot. I know a podcast is gonna live on and on and on, so I'm not gonna put out there exactly what we need right now, but if you are interested in getting involved, there are some ways you can get involved remotely, and we have a huge need locally. And if you're New Bern-ish, North Carolina, let us know. Email me. You can email me if you want to. It's Amy Connor. So it's AMYCONNOR @HesedPlace.com. And we'll make sure that we get you plugged in, answer questions. That happens. People find us and they say, how can we get involved? And we love that. But we're establishing our committees. We're working on our fundraising. If you want to hold a fundraising event wherever you are, you can do that wherever you are. Please help us fund what we're trying to do, because it's going to take a lot. It's going to take all of us.
And people are able to make anonymous donations if they need to, and you guys are a 501c3,
Yes.
so there is tax benefits and write-offs and all that
Yes.
stuff as well, correct?
Absolutely.
Beautiful, beautiful. Very last thing, where can people find you? You guys are located in New Bern, North Carolina. Where can we find you physically, online? Tell us about all that.
Okay. In New Bern, we're right there on Trent Road, 2619 Trent Road, and it's got Hesed Place. It's HESED Place on the building, and sometimes we have flags out. We have a little sign. We have quite an extensive online presence, actually. Our main website is hesedplace.com. We have an online community. You can register at hesedplace.org. Now right now we're on Facebook. Our Hesed Place team, myself, I'm there a lot doing trauma-related topics. I think we probably have about 250 hours archived already on trauma-related topics in that group. And you can join live and participate in comments if you join the group. We are building out our local engaged community program, which is going to be part of that. So then we open up our Journey Center, which is the address I said earlier, and we're going to offer things like pottery and art therapy and trauma-sensitive yoga, and we're going to build on that. The hesedplace.org is a paid membership. It's a very small membership fee. It's for a dedicated group of people interested in healing. You do not have to be a survivor to join. That's our track for anyone who's interested in healing. So join us. You can participate, watch, learn, connect.
And I'm sure that membership goes right back into the organization.
It goes right back to the org. And so it just supports our programs. In fact, something that it may not be true 3 years ago, 3 years down the road if you're watching this podcast, but right now we're still on an all volunteer basis. So we are really working super hard with day jobs, really getting this off the ground.
You still have a full-time job? Yep.
I work as an occupational therapist,
Right.
and I'm finding ways to blend that and bring it under the umbrella of
Beautiful.
Hesed.
Yeah, because I think that speaks volumes too to people that are
Yeah.
watching this, that you're not just working for a nonprofit and you're just, siphoning the money out of it. No, you're still working a regular day job as an OT and doing this organization,
That's
out of just the pure kindness of your heart.
And I've done this practically full time for over a decade, just because I've given those years away. And so, we are just really working hard to get this movement. It's actually been called a movement. This movement going, where we can get it going really strong and healthy here locally, and then pick it up and share it. And so you can be a part of that with us as well. And we're also on Instagram. So we have our regular Hesed Place on Facebook and on Instagram. We're getting ready to we're behind, but launch Twitter. I'm sorry,
X.
TikTok. TikTok,
Oh,
yeah,
X
that's
and
now it's
TikTok.
X, but TikTok,
Yeah.
TikTok. So you'll find us on all the platforms before too long, but especially Facebook is our strongest presence right now, and you'll find us on the others as well before too long.
Beautiful. Before we put a bow on this thing, is there anything else that you want people to know about Hesed Place, know about occupational therapy?
I think I've enjoyed this. Thank you for the opportunity to have the
Oh,
conversation.
for sure.
And I guess my biggest final thought is just we really want those of you who have a heart to help those who are hurting to get involved in some way. And giving is a gift as well. Like giving out of our heart is our giftedness. And so in any way that you feel like you could participate, please reach out and be a part of this. It doesn't matter where you are. We can plug you in.
Beautiful. Really good way to wrap it up. Thanks a lot, Amy.
Yeah. Thanks, Philip.
Bye,
Enjoyed
guys.
it. Thanks for having me.
Oh, for sure. Thank you.